So as promised in the last video, this is what's going on in the engine bay. Classic eBay turbo, no brand, no serial numbers. This is basically the cheapest cast manifold you can buy. It's got a small but reasonable size intercooler in the front. Still has the stock radiator, super skinny stock radiator with a Chinese slim fan that moves practically no air. It's got some Bosch 440s from a Ford in here. Not sure what Ford, but it's got those. I think that's probably the only quality part in here. I'll put some more specs on screen and then move over to when I first got the car. The seller did start the car for me, but it had a massive oil leak. This fitting for the turbo oil feed actually broke off in the back of the block. This is where the oil pressure sensor normally sits and where you would get pressurized oil for the turbo. I had to use an extractor tool to get the threads cleaned out and to get that part that was broken off in there out. I did manage to damage the threads in the process because my China City tap set didn't have the correct size tap. These are the pieces that came out of the threads. So to fix the problem, I just installed a sandwich plate, connected the oil pressure sensor and the turbo feed line to that, and then blocked off the original oil pressure sensor because the threads there is quite damaged. Next, the crank pulley came loose and started to destroy the keyway. This is also the wrong pulley, as the alternator belt would continuously try to climb off the pulley. Luckily I have another engine, so I had the right pulley and another keyway to just fit. This pulley has also seen some better days, but at least it's the right one. This is also not the first time this pulley came loose, as the crank has already been damaged by a pulley coming loose before. After this I was able to take the car for a test drive. At first the car pulled really well, but after about 6 or 7 consecutive pulls, it started developing a misfire under boost. So I decided to check the spark plugs just to see what was going on. So this is the spark plug from cylinder 1 and 2, and they're not even the same spark plug. Also, the one has been capped to about 1 millimeter, where the other one is almost 2 millimeters. But more concerning is the fact that they're not in the same condition. The one from cylinder 1 is in good shape, it has a light brown color, where the other one from cylinder 2 is almost oil soaked. This is the spark plug from cylinder number 3, and it's very black. It's not oil soaked, but it's very black. Normally that means that it's running quite rich. This is cylinder 4 and it's also quite black, so I think the cylinder is also running quite rich. At this stage I was preparing the car for a car meet the next morning, about an hour's drive away. Sadly, changing the spark plugs and plug wires didn't really make any noticeable difference to the car. Also, I spent most of my time getting the outside of the car ready, so I didn't really have much time to focus on the engine. I decided to flush the cooling system because this car was sitting for about 5 years. This actually turned out to be a terrible idea, as the radiator started leaking and suspicious small bubbles started appearing, similar to those you get from a seeping head gasket. So it turns out all the radiator flush did was flush out the radiator fix that was already in the system. Luckily this was easily fixed by just putting radiator fix in the system again. Luckily the car made the 2 hours drive there and back without any problems. So because the spark plugs were all in different conditions, I decided to look into the fuel system next. I took off the fuel rail and cleaned out the injectors with some carburetor cleaner. Only cylinder 1's injector was noticeably blocked from, you could see it from the spray pattern. However, the carburetor cleaner did manage to clean it out, and they all visually had the same spray pattern by the time I was done. I also made some zip tie spacers just to get the injectors sitting not so deep into the rail, because they were sitting in so deep almost right up to the back of the fuel rail. Sadly, after all this, it still made no noticeable difference to the engine. So next I decided to turn my attention back to the ignition system. I actually removed the distributor and noticed there's quite a bit of oil coming out of it. Now there is a small hole in the bottom of it designed for letting oil out of it. However, because this distributor is not from this engine, that hole is actually not at the bottom, so the oil seems to dam up inside before it can actually reach the drain hole. I took it apart, changed the cap, the rotor, the coil, and just cleaned up all the components inside. Also replaced the little seal at the end and then put everything back together. I must say this actually helped a lot. It helped with cold starts, it helped with idling, the car wouldn't stall as easily, and for quite some time I couldn't actually get the car to misfire again. So it mostly fixed that issue. However, a bit later on the car did start misfiring again on occasion. So after the ignition system, the car was fairly reliable. You could beat on it without any issues, and only on the rare occasion it would misfire again. I'm kind of contributing it to maybe a wiring issue, as there's lots of twist and tape connections on the ECU wiring loom for this car. The next thing that happened was a small fuel leak from the fuel pressure regulator. Minutes before I wanted to take the car to the drag strip. However, this was easily fixed with a new O-ring. While at the drag strip, I actually noticed the car does not want to go into second gear if you try and quick shift it. So that's also something we'll have to look into in the future. I do actually already have another gearbox for it from one of my other cars. Now something else that's still bothering me is the car is not pulling as hard as it did the first time I drove it. The first time I drove it, the first, let's say 4 or 5 pulls, the car pulled very hard. And since the misfiring started and I fixed it, even though it's working now, it's not pulling as it used to before, and that's definitely something I'll have to look into getting fixed. So something else that I may have been hiding is the fact that this car does not start with a key. You have to jump it on the starter, yeah. So what I did is I ran a wire directly from the fuse box inside. This is actually a trick I saw on Deadbeat Garage. You have small terminals under here that has 12 volts when the ignition's on. However, this worked great only once when I went to the shop. Tried to start it again, it just made the disappointing noise of failing electronics, and that was the end of my push button start. So we're back to starting it with a screwdriver. Future plans for this car is to replace the engine and gearbox. The reason for that is the head gasket in this car is being held together with radiator fix. Also, I may have gotten some copper shavings into the oiling system during the fitting removal, and there's no second gear in this car unless you granny shift. Also, I already have another engine that I'm going to rebuild soon, so just for the sake of me already having it, we'll be replacing it, and while the engine is pulled out, we will wire tuck and paint the engine bay.